Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. So today's guest, we have Erin Prohaska. Erin is a highly skilled professional with a diverse background in finance and taxation. She began her career at Deloitte's in their private company tax practice. Erin holds a CPA CA designation, is a member of STEP, and is a graduate of the University of Waterloo's Master of Taxation program, where she was a recipient of the Canadian Tax Foundation Scholar Award.
Very cool, doesn't it make me?
Wow. I think, were you one of the cool kids in school?
Totally,
Yeah.
Totally. Master in tax definitely puts you up there.
So how did you end up in the tax program? Like what sort of drew you into that?
I started my professional career as an accountant at Deloitte and really not sure what division of Deloitte or what type of practice I wanted to go in. I knew that I was a bit of a homebody and I like stability. So auditing would always have you going from client to client to client. You never had a home base, whereas tax at the time, you had an office. They started you in an office. So that and the fact I always felt like tax looked a lot like law. And because tax was like law, but I wanted to get an accounting degree, I thought, heck, let's do this. So that's why I started in tax. Immediately fell in love with it, and Deloitte...
I don't think anybody actually fell in love with tax.
No, believe it or not, I truly love and have a passion for tax. I have a passion for solving problems that originate with money, and really you can attribute tax to almost anything that has a money element to it, and that's why I like to do it. From there, I excelled, and Deloitte saw an opportunity to offer me to go back and do a master's. So they really sponsored the program.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So you're no longer at Deloitte. So tell us about your journey to where you are now.
Oh, boy. I have a bit of a storied past. I didn't grow up in the system doing, Deloitte forever and then ultimately find myself today at Continuum. I hopped around a little bit. So when I was at Deloitte, I practiced exclusively with private companies and their shareholders. One of my clients at the time, the founders of BlackBerry, they recruited me to join their family office. It was an incredible opportunity, and I jumped at it.
I gotta say, I loved BlackBerry.
Yes.
Very disappointed when there was no more BlackBerry.
I still have one kicking around my house, unwilling to let it go. It's a relic, but there's nostalgia there for sure.
Yeah.
So I worked in their family office as a director of finance for a couple years, and for family reasons, I came back to the city, took 2 CFO roles, one in a large global engineering firm and one in a publicly traded cannabis company. Oh, yeah. I felt I needed to join the circus temporarily, hence why I joined the cannabis company. Since then, I decided to settle back into my own roots. I came back to the estate planning side. I focused on tax and estate planning using life insurance. It's sort of a facet of tax that even in my 12 years of practice, in public practice, I never really opened those sections of the Act. It wasn't something that was being used commonly. It is today.
Right.
Today, your high net worth, your ultra high net worth, your private company shareholders, they are looking at insurance as part of their estate planning and their transition tools, and it's an aspect you got to understand.
So you now work for Continuum, which is...
I am a partner of Continuum Legacy Partners. We're a small boutique shop. We're really advisory focused. Although we sell insurance, it is the revenue generator of our business. We come about it from a different lens. We are, for the most part, all CPAs. I have a master's in tax. Our managing partner was a marketplace leader at Deloitte. On our board of advisors, we have a former co-chairman of Deloitte. We just bring a different thought process to, I'd say, the world of life insurance, which is beginning to professionalize.
Right. And you're mainly dealing with family businesses.
We are almost exclusively dealing with family businesses and shareholder transition.
Because life insurance has never been like a popular topic for anybody, particularly from accountants. So I'm really surprised at, as an accountant, the fact that you use that as a tool in tax planning is fascinating.
It's very true. So on the one hand, I've changed careers and I now get to tell people, and my poor parents have to explain what I'm doing. And you get the look of she's fallen from grace. Like, she was partner tracking at Deloitte. She was working for the founders of BlackBerry. She's held these CFO jobs, and she's doing what now? She got a life insurance license? What happened? But the truth is, I am licensed to sell life insurance, but life insurance is professionalizing. There are firms out there similar to ours, although I would say we're very unique still, that are bringing an advisory element. They're bringing professional elements. They're bringing CPAs. They're bringing masters of taxation experts. They are bringing lawyers on board because it is a technical space, and it has to be collaborative with the broader wealth team that these families work with. You need to be able to speak the language. I can speak the language of their tax accountants. I can speak the language of their lawyers.
So who are your clients? And so you're dealing with these family businesses. So how do you get called in if you are a CPA and you are an insurance professional? How does that actually work, and where would you be called in, or how would you be called in?
Yeah, so a lot of our work comes from CPAs, lawyers who are working with their clients, and they identify through various conversations a potential risk of no one has thought about how the taxation predominantly of their private company shares is going to be managed. So liquidity is a huge issue. We don't step on toes. So let me be very clear. Although I'm a CPA and have a master's in tax, I don't intend to replace their team. We don't do that work. We'll augment their team. We will help. We will be a whiteboard. We will soundboard for them. We'll develop ideas, but I don't implement anything.
Okay, so you're not in competition with their
I am not in competition with them.
Tax professionals or accountants.
No, we help them in a time when labor is short and they're struggling across the board with teams and recruitment. We come in at a very senior level and can and will do anything to help move a file along. So,
who should be reaching out to you? Like, if you're brought in by lawyers and accountants, but what happens if you don't have an accountant who is pro insurance or understanding how that tool can be used in the tax planning for family businesses? How can they find you? Like, when should they call you in?
Well, early is always better. Yeah, I think you'll find that in your business too. Like, understanding and having education in the space is important. We're starting to get out there and meet with different accounting firms, provide education sessions. So we do, as a complimentary thing, as something I enjoy doing, is teaching. So we have like an insurance 101 for advisors, how to advise on insurance, how to understand all these acronyms that no one's ever talked to you about. I sometimes go back in time and I'm like, I must have been a terrible tax practitioner, because after the typical estate plan was done, there's a freeze, there's a trust, and you think, I'm done. Wipe my hands clean. I've done a great job for this client. I've set them up for the future. Next gen is earning through a trust. I now refer to what we do as the post-estate plan. You got to finish the estate plan. Your work is not done. Your next job now is to look at, maybe how much frozen value have you put in G1's hands, and how is that going to be dealt with? Who's talking postmortem planning? Who's talking about this looming tax liability and how it will be funded? Because suggesting to a real estate client that they sell buildings doesn't typically go over well.
No. And, it's very difficult, right? When you're trying to equalize in an estate or transition from one gen to the next, whether it's through, a sale or a death, that there's a lot of tax implications that come in to play.
There's a lot of tax implications.
There's not a lot of tools left, is there?
There are not a lot of tools left. No, the legislation is making it more and more challenging to do unique planning. Obviously, new GAR, and I won't get into all the technical tax legislation proposed or enacted right now, but insurance is still out there. Insurance is a highly effective tool, commonly misunderstood, quite frankly. I think a lot of people attribute life insurance to, used car salespeople. It won't pay out. It's like trying to make a claim on your house or your car, which is always, riddled with reasons why the carrier won't pay out. But life insurance isn't like that. It's quite binary. If you have a death certificate and excluding the sort of 2-year contestability period, it pays out. and it's highly tax efficient.
Right.
You know, people don't realize that when it's corporately owned, and most of our work is clients who will own policies through corporations, the returns on the policy as they're earned in an exempt policy, tax-free. Ultimately, the receipt of the death benefit in a corp, tax-free. And through various mechanisms, predominantly or generally speaking, you can extract those death benefits to a shareholder. So take it out of the corporate sphere and move it into a person's hands or an estate's hands without another layer of tax. Nothing else does it.
No. And how do you determine then, what should be owned personally and what should be owned corporately? Like what part of the stage or what part of the discovery do you figure that out? Because some people already own insurance, right? So is it in the right spot? How do you figure that out?
Absolutely. Some people already own insurance. Most of our clients are using insurance strategically. So a lot of our clients we're brought in before they have any material policies. If they have something personally, it's not the policy that's going to solve the big picture problems. And we are looking at where is ownership, but it tends to be more a discussion of opco, new holdco. Some could own insurance in a trust. Why might you own insurance in a trust? Which entity might be sold? We don't want insurance in an entity that has a potential for a future sale. That's more of the discussion that we have. Very few, I would say probably less than 15% of our clients are acquiring large policies personally. And that's the tax element of it, right? Like you're funding these insurance policies with one layer of tax as opposed to two.
So when you're working with their other professional advisors, so are they bringing you in because of the tax strategies, or are they bringing you in because you're solution focused on an insurance to be a tool, or is there other tools in your quiver that you use?
I think they're bringing us in because we know insurance, but we also know tax and estate planning tactics, tools, opportunities. Like we're well abreast of what's out there. We like to be abreast of what's out there. And so we'll come in and we're not looking to, whatever it is, fit a square peg in a round hole. Like I'm not looking to find a reason to sell insurance. We're looking to talk to a client, make sure that we're understanding of what their goals are, what are their fears, what are they worried might happen, where are they today if they do nothing. Like that's usually the premise for it all. Let's just benchmark. If you do nothing today, what's going to happen? And then what are our options if you don't like that result? You can, self-insure. Let's start buying investments and we run those models. How would that look? Insurance is definitely there. You could liquidate certain assets at the time. Maybe it's a volatile market. What about leveraging certain investments? Is this in the cards for you? What combination of these solutions will make you feel the most comfortable in leaving an estate to your next gen and an estate that you're happy to leave them?
And so you talk about insurance and trust. Can you talk a little bit about when that's a good idea?
Yeah, it's not the most common for sure to see insurance and trust, and it typically is somewhat of more of a U.S. concept that we see them used. But there are ideas out there where if you can fund the first one into the trust, the interesting thing about insurance and a trust is that unlike other assets in the trust, and you're probably familiar with this, after 21 years, unless you want to pay tax on the appreciation, you typically have to roll those assets out because they're capital property. Insurance is not. So not a well-known fact, but insurance is technically not capital property, and therefore a policy could sit in a trust tax-free forever. And so if you can get the first policy into the trust and have a payout, you can almost use this trust like a dynasty trust and roll it over and over again and then distribute to family members to fund lifestyle or to fund other needs.
So what are some of the other tools you use when you're doing tax planning or when you're going in to analyze? Because you're being called in specifically for a purpose. Right?
We're being called in to look at an estate plan and see if there's ways to augment it.
Right.
Can anything be done to make it better? We will help with.
So it's after the estate plan is done. So someone's done an estate plan, like, hey,
or concurrent with it.
You just want to check this out.
Yeah,
is there anything else?
They're working concurrent. They may be doing a freeze. They've already gone through an analysis of objectives and what are we trying to get here. But when you're freezing at $50 million, $70 million, $100+ million, and the lifestyle is never going to warrant that in terms of drawing up the frozen value, good practitioners, good tax practitioners are already starting to think about what are we going to do with this gain that if we don't start thinking about it is going to trigger a very large tax liability.
Now you're talking about ultra high net worth, but what about for the average family business who might be only worth, $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, $20 million?
Yeah, so for those clients, I think insurance, we discuss a lot with them. If it's not a risk element for them, it's more of an investment opportunity for them. So as an example, my family just went through a divestiture of a business, and so there's funds sitting in a holding company. And the goal of my parents is to ensure the greatest transition value. They're not buying a $50 million life insurance. I wish. If they were, I probably actually wouldn't be here right now today. But they are looking at and are very conscious of what kind of investments are we holding that are going to facilitate the most amount of value out of that estate to my brother and I. And so those are the discussions we have is what does the asset allocation look like? How could insurance play a role in optimizing value transfer?
Interesting. And I think that's really key is for optimizing the value, the transfer, right? Because a lot of, I think insurance gets a bad rap a lot of times, right?
It gets a terrible reputation, and those selling it even worse.
Absolutely. And I don't know why that is. Why is that?
Oh boy, I could probably go on for days about why it is. Without, discrediting anyone, I think there's insurance that's been sold, either oversold, so people have been overinsured. There's a lot of people out there who have policies and don't understand what they bought, and that's always a concern. As an acquirer of an asset, to not understand what you've put a significant amount of money into, I think lends to frustration and concern that maybe perhaps someone has swayed you into buying something you might not have needed. That's likely why the insurance industry simply doesn't have a great reputation. And historically, there was a commission structure that also meant that insurance agents didn't stick around after the fact,
right,
to monitor these assets. We don't believe in that.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a whole, negative, rabbit hole we don't really want to go down. Is understanding that, client sells or an advisor sells something and then walks away.
Orphan policies are a real issue these days.
Huge. And or people who would start in a company go, what's an orphan policy? It's like it's a policy that doesn't have an advisor.
That's it. It's a policy where it was sold and the advisor is nowhere to be found. The client can't get questions answered. They're getting notifications. They don't know what their options are with these policies. And all these policies are contracts. They all have options on them. Do you want to stop premium payments? Can you go on a premium holiday? Can you issue a reduced paid up, which is a process that allows you to permanently stop with no risk the premium payments and use the cash value in almost like a single one-time pay to buy a new death benefit. What can I do with this policy? Can I take my dividends for cash because I need them to fund my lifestyle? Clients who can't access a broker and can't get questions answered, I think they're in a really tough position.
Absolutely. So you're talking about a whole life type of contract or participating,
Typically whole life. We generally will work with clients with permanent policies. That's not to say that the term doesn't have a place in high or ultra high net worth or for anybody. Term absolutely has a place.
It's not an estate tool though.
It's not
generally.
It's not
long term.
No, it's not long term. But what it can be interesting and used for is bridging gaps between. So you and I were talking earlier about, a lot of people come in and say, I need a trust. It's time, I should freeze, and I got to have a trust. And usually my first question is, well, why? What are we trying to achieve here? Sometimes that happens, and we see it all the time, where trusts and freezes happen really early. People are earning substantial amounts of money, very successful businesses in their 30s, haven't had kids yet. And so there's trust in places, but 21 years out, there's going to be a rollout of trust asset, and they don't anticipate them going to children because these kids will be less than 21 years old. So you're going to undo a lot of the tax benefits of that estate plan. So we say to those clients, a big good plan may involve insurance, but you're not ready for that big comprehensive plan today. Why don't you buy a term policy? It's efficient, it's effective, it's affordable, and it can convert in, let's say in the next 10 years, into that bigger policy, that whole life policy that we're going to use strategically. But in the meantime, we've locked in your health. And that's a huge thing right now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So we use it as a risk mitigator. Locking in health, I think, is really important, and that's why term can be a useful tool in the high net worth planning space.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. So people think about whole life insurance as sort of a negative, like whole life's like
Too expensive.
Yeah. So, that's a big myth. So
Yep.
debunk that myth for me.
Sure. Whole life isn't just an expense on your P&L. I think that's what everyone says. Well, I'm paying this very exorbitant, if you will, premium, and therefore it's too expensive for me. But whole life has a core insurance component, and then the rest of that premium is actually buying you an investment. It's buying you an asset. And people forget that there is a line item on your balance sheet. So whole life is an investment account. The cash surrender value, which again is another term associated with life insurance, it sits as an asset on your books. And in most cases, after 4 years, the value of the asset exceeds the total of the premiums that you've spent. So in fairness, over time, you're actually having an uptick in your retained earnings. It's not depleting you. It's not causing deficits every year. You're actually up in value with a tax-free asset.
And I don't think people think about that. But that's if it's corporately, right? If it's personally owned.
If it's personally owned, of course, you're not seeing the balance sheet impact of it because most people don't prepare personal balance sheets. But if you did, you'd have the same outcome.
Right. And do you think that most insurance is on the P&L sheet?
I think that you pretty much have to expense the premium somewhere. I think a lot of clients miss the cash surrender value on the balance sheet side of it because it's easy to hit one side of the entry. And if you don't have professional advice and someone doesn't understand the nature of the policy you bought or you don't understand it, you forget to record the asset.
Mm-hmm. And, again, going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but so you have an operating company, maybe you have a holding company.
Yeah.
And maybe you have a couple of operating companies and a holding company. How do you determine where it should be held, in the operating or holding?
Yeah, we're not big fans of life insurance and operating companies for a couple different reasons. One is, I would say, creditor protection. It's just not really where you want it to be. The other reason would be in the event that there is a future sale of one of those businesses, you don't want the insurance policy there. So holding companies are great places for life insurance, and that's generally where we would seek to plan them.
So let's say you have an operating company, you don't have a holding company yet, and you have a holding company. How does that work?
If you don't have a holding company yet, pretty easy to create one. Again, you don't just willy-nilly create companies. I think there's a discussion that should be had. There is a cost, obviously, to putting new corporate entities in your structure. There's administrative elements of it, and then there's an understanding of, well, what else could we be using this holding company for? There's creditor protection or asset protection strategies that now you can use your holding company for. In the world of deferral, it used to be a pretty solid planning tool to build investment assets in a holding company. Maybe not so much going forward. We'll see what happens down the road. But it used to be good, solid practice to get deferral through a holding company. It's not very difficult to put a holding company in place and roll some shares down so that you have just a stacked structure.
So can you put your insurance policy that was in your operating company up into your holding company?
Oh, you would need to look at whether or not you could do it. Absolutely, you can move insurance policies around, but at a certain point in time, you may be triggering gains, and so that would be a deterrent from doing so.
And is that something that you look at when you're in doing this estate plan or reviewing the estate plan to say, hey, here's something we could do or we shouldn't do? Or
if we see a policy in an operating company, we would certainly look to see whether or not we could move it into a holding company or another entity without triggering tax. Sometimes the trigger of tax might not be very much, so the long-term gain of doing so is there. Sometimes they're very old policies and there'd be a significant gain in moving them, and you might have to just take the exposure that you have with it being where it is.
Mm-hmm. Which could cause a problem if the company gets sold. So tell me, what would happen if a company got sold and you had an insurance contract in the company?
Well, a couple different things could happen, but initially what would happen is the policy would move with the company because the owner of the policy is the corporate owner, and the new buyer would, I guess, have a discussion with you whether or not you could buy the policy out from them with similar consequences, because someone's now going to have, it's just like any other asset, right? There's a cost basis to it and there's a value that will transfer at, so you could trigger a gain. And gains on insurance policies are not like capital gains. I think I mentioned earlier, it's not capital property. These will be full-on income gains. So big taxation on sales if there is in fact more value, cash value typically, than ACB. And then the other risk with insurance policies when you transfer is has there been a health change to the insured themselves? And to the extent that there is, those gains can be much more sizable than anyone anticipate. We would always get a valuation done.
Now, can you move something that's an individual policy to a corporate policy?
Yes, you can. Absolutely. Same thing. You can transfer a policy down. And sometimes people do that because they can then create basis, which they can use to extract value out of their companies. Because if they've paid it personally, they have tax paid basis in the value of that policy and when they transfer it down. But it's going to be the same issue, right? It's not capital property. You can't roll it like you can a class of shares, as an example. So these are all dispositions and acquisitions.
So it's up to the individual then to track that, right? Because the insurance companies don't track that for you.
The insurance companies can track and do track your adjusted cost basis. So you can obtain that information from them. You definitely want to check it, I'll say.
Because I do think that it's not sort of information that's readily available. You have to ask for it.
You do have to ask for it.
If you don't know what to ask for, that's your first problem, right?
That's why having good advisory is really, really important. It's probably one of my number one tips if you're looking at insurance and a life insurance policy. Be very critical. Do due diligence on who is going to be the advisor for you. Is their business poised for succession? Or are you buying from a friend who may or may, not have the breadth of knowledge that's actually required to make sure this policy is going to work for you to the best of its advantages? There's a lot of things you can do with insurance. We didn't talk about it yet, but it's a highly leverageable asset too. So, you asked me about it being expensive. There's a lot of people out there who will try to and successfully acquire life insurance and then use it just like a real estate property because it's highly leverageable. Loan to values are almost a dollar for dollar on the cash surrender value. So they'll buy their insurance policy and then they'll seek to use the policy as leverage to reinvest in their business, essentially having their cake and eating it too.
Right. And that's a whole podcast on its own. It's talking about how to do all that.
It is. That's where the tax expertise comes in and making sure that you're taking steps in the right order. You're thinking things through. Are there opportunities? Premiums can be deductible in certain circumstances. People forget that. If you're leveraging, there's opportunities to get interest deductions. The same thing. But again, you can't do this in a vacuum. It's where you need all of the team members on side. You need to make sure you understand the client's specific fact patterns, how they're doing things before you start, getting too creative.
Well, and that comes back to being a family business advisor and making sure that the family is aligned and the business is aligned so they know exactly what's happening so that you can have those right contracts put in place, or if a trust is needed, or what you're trying to accomplish to bring in a team, a collaborative team, to actually help you do it. Right. It can't all be done by one person.
No, no planning should be done by one person. And particularly in the spaces that you're talking about, the high net worth space, one person they don't know everything.
No. You have your lanes, right? And I always talk about that. You need a quarterback. I'm considered the quarterback.
Right.
Because then I can figure out what the family is wanting to achieve overall, to align them, and then talk to the advisors to say, how can we make this happen in the best way? Because A, you might have to pay some tax, or B, you have to give up some control in order to have what you want. But it's important that you're all aligned so you understand why you're making the decisions you're making, or putting in the solutions that you're putting in, so you don't go back later and say, why did we do that trust again?
Right.
Why do we do that? Why do we put the insurance in the holding company? Like, what's that for?
Why do we have insurance?
Why do we have insurance? Why are we paying this huge premium?
What is this? We need to get rid of this. This is a big expense. Well, you may be missing the asset, number one. But let's go back to the drawing board and remember, what are we planning for here?
Yeah.
What is this insurance poised to do to help with?
Well, the thing about insurance, I remember this from years ago, it's like you can't eat it, you can't drive it, you can't drink it, right? It's just a pure expense. Like there's nothing there. It doesn't provide anything other than, an expense, it seems, for most people, right? It's like the first thing to go when you're trying to cut back on things. And it should actually be the last thing to go.
It's very true. It's also, though, one of those like best kept secrets. I think if you know, you know. That's why you're crazy rich families in Canada, these highly successful businesses, they have it, and they have it in spades. and they
Right.
constantly are looking to get more. They've tapped out the Canadian market, they've tapped out the international market, and they're still seeking out opportunities to
Right.
acquire more life insurance for their family. And
Yeah.
then on the polar opposite is like insurance is a scam, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, something's missing in between. And insurance it's that best kept secret in the world of wealth and family succession.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're out of time. And so I do like to end every podcast with your top 3 tips.
Oh,
So you have some tips that you would give to family businesses in your realm, whether that's the tax planning, the insurance planning. What is it, the 3 top tips you would give to family businesses?
okay.
Families and in business, I guess.
Families in business. Okay, so I won't go straight on insurance planning. I'm going to say my number 1 tip will be start your communications about succession early. I think having a long runway for anything you want to do is probably my number 1 tip. Don't leave things till the end and think they're going to work out. Start slow and give yourself a lot of time to get stuff done.
I love that.
So that's my number 1. Number 2, with family businesses, involve everyone, or involve more people than you think you should. And I guess that goes out to G1. You don't want to tell G2 how things are going to go, because you may wind up very surprised that it's not what they want, or what you think they want isn't what they want. Collaborate with the family, have open discussion with them. And you know, we talked about this earlier, like do it in a place where people can really speak their mind and force that to happen.
In a
Not
safe
tell you what
environment.
not tell you what you want to hear, because you're going to find out that transition isn't going to go the way you think.
No.
And number 3, I'd be remiss not to provide a tip about insurance. When it comes to life insurance, be very thoughtful about the advisors you seek out to sell you life insurance. It's not a commodity. Not all carriers are created alike. The least expensive premium is not going to be necessarily the best performing asset. So think wisely about it, and in order to get the most out of this asset that you probably want, not necessarily need, do your due diligence on the advisors you're working with.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Erin, for coming in today. This was great.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find BlueRoots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.